In the eerie stillness of a moonlit night, I found myself home alone, surrounded by the hushed shadows that seemed to play tricks on my imagination. The old house creaked with every gust of wind, setting a spooky symphony that echoed through the empty halls. My parents had left for a weekend getaway, leaving me with the unsettling feeling of solitude. As the clock struck midnight, an unexpected power outage plunged the house into complete darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the pale glow illuminating my anxious face. The only source of light was the feeble flame of a solitary candle I managed to find in the kitchen. Unease settled in as the wind outside howled like a distant, tortured soul. The house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, its ancient timbers groaning in protest. I hesitated but decided to explore the eerie unknown with the dim candle leading the way. As I moved through the darkened rooms, a whispering wind carried ghostly tales into my ears. My imagination ran wild, conjuring up phantom figures lurking in the shadows. I reached the hallway, and the flickering candle cast dancing shadows on the walls, morphing ordinary objects into sinister shapes. A sudden chill gripped the air as I noticed a subtle movement at the end of the hallway. Panic set in as I strained my eyes to see what lurked in the darkness. The shadows seemed to coalesce into a spectral silhouette, standing ominously at the edge of my vision. I blinked, and it vanished. Doubt gnawed at my sanity, but I pressed on, drawn by an unseen force. The air grew thick with an otherworldly presence, and the temperature dropped with each step. As I approached the staircase, a phantom whisper echoed, chilling my spine. The voice seemed to beckon from the abyss below. Summoning courage, I descended into the abyss, the staircase creaking beneath my weight. The candle's glow barely penetrated the darkness, revealing only fragments of the foreboding unknown. The house seemed alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy that made the air heavy with trepidation. A distant sound echoed, a muffled sob that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves. The air turned icy as I followed the haunting cry, leading me to a forgotten door tucked away in the corner of the basement. With a hesitant hand, I pushed it open. A gust of frigid wind greeted me, extinguishing the feeble flame. In the pitch-black abyss, a ghastly figure materialized, bathed in an ethereal glow. It was a specter of a woman, her eyes hollow and tormented. She beckoned with spectral fingers, imploring me to understand her plight. Paralyzed with fear, I listened to her lament, a tragic tale of betrayal and loss that bound her spirit to the confines of this wretched house. As her story unfolded, the basement transformed into a macabre theater, playing scenes of sorrow and despair. The walls whispered secrets, and the air pulsed with the anguish of a bygone era. With each revelation, the spectral figure grew more corporeal, her visage shifting from ethereal to hauntingly real. She implored me to break the curse that bound her soul to this accursed dwelling. The weight of responsibility pressed upon me, and the once faint candle flickered back to life, guiding me through the labyrinth of her tortured memories. Together, we unraveled the threads of the past, confronting the darkness that lingered in the corners of the house. As dawn broke, a serene calm settled over the once haunted halls. The specter, freed from the shackles of the past, dissipated into the morning light, leaving behind a house reborn. My parents returned to find me in the now tranquil home, the horrors of the night erased by the warmth of the sunrise. Though the memory lingered, the spectral encounter became a whispered legend, an otherworldly tale of a home alone horror story that transcended the boundaries between the living and the dead. Story 2. The air was thick with tension as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows through the empty rooms of my house. My parents had gone on a last-minute business trip, leaving me home alone for the first time. Initially, the prospect seemed liberating, a taste of independence, but as darkness settled in, an unsettling feeling crept over me. I tried to shake off the unease and distract myself with a movie. the flickering light from the TV providing a feeble comfort. The familiar hum of the refrigerator and the distant hum of passing cars were the only sounds in the otherwise silent house. But silence can be deceiving, and the subtle shifts in the quietude hinted at something more sinister. As the movie reached its climax, a sudden power outage plunged the house into absolute darkness. The abrupt silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own racing heartbeat. I fumbled for my phone, the screen casting an eerie glow on my frightened face. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was just a temporary glitch. I reached for a flashlight and cautiously ventured into the inky blackness to check the circuit breaker. The floor creaked beneath my hesitant steps, and the shadows seemed to dance, taking on shapes that sent shivers down my spine. As I approached the breaker, a chilling gust of wind extinguished the small flame of my courage, leaving me in total darkness. A sudden thud echoed through the silence, and I froze. The house felt like a sentient being, alive with creaks and murmurs that hinted at an unseen presence. I strained my ears, hoping to dismiss the sounds as mere figments of my imagination. Another thud, closer this time, shattered that fragile hope. Heart pounding, I traced the noise to the basement door. It stood slightly ajar, a gateway to the unknown. I hesitated, my mind conjuring images of horror movie scenarios. But curiosity mingled with fear, compelling me to descend into the abyss below. The creaking stairs amplified the disquieting hollowness of the basement. As I reached the bottom, I felt a cold draft, like the breath of something unseen. The feeble beam of my flashlight revealed an old dusty piano in the corner. It stood there, an antique relic from a forgotten era, its keys seemingly untouched by human hands for years. A haunting melody filled the air, a melancholic tune that seemed to resonate from the depths of the instrument. Panic seized me as I realized that no one else was in the house. The melody intensified, each note echoing with an otherworldly sorrow that sent chills down my spine. In a desperate attempt to silence the haunting music, I fumbled for the piano's lid, slamming it shut. The abrupt silence was almost as chilling as the spectral melody. I stood there, surrounded by darkness, my breath uneven, wondering if I had just become a character in my own horror story. The basement seemed to come alive with unseen whispers, and the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. I turned to leave, but the door at the far end of the room swung open with a slow, deliberate creak. A pale light spilled into the room, revealing a narrow corridor that led to an ancient-looking door. Compelled by an otherworldly force, I stepped through the doorway, the door creaking shut behind me. The air grew colder as I found myself in a room frozen in time. Antique furniture draped in dusty sheets lined the walls, and faded portraits stared at me with eyes that seemed to follow my every move. A mirror at the far end of the room reflected a figure standing behind me, a figure that wasn't mine. I turned around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. The mirror, however, still held the ghostly visage of a long-forgotten resident. The room pulsed with an energy that seemed to transcend time. A voice echoed through the space, recounting a tale of betrayal and tragedy. I listened, captivated by the sorrowful narrative of a family torn apart by dark secrets. The spectral voices wove a tapestry of despair, and I felt like an intruder in their twisted history. As the last haunting words faded, the room fell silent. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and I found myself standing alone in the dimly lit basement once more. The door to the forgotten room stood ajar, the piano silent in the corner. Morning light began to filter through the basement windows, dispelling the remnants of the night's horrors. My parents returned later that day, finding me pale and shaken, unable to articulate the supernatural ordeal I had experienced. The basement, now devoid of its ghostly presence, seemed like any other room in the house. But in the quiet moments, I could still hear the distant echoes of the haunting melody and the spectral voices that lingered in the shadows. a reminder that some horrors are not bound by the constraints of the physical world. Story 3. The clock struck midnight, and the house settled into an eerie stillness as I found myself alone for the night. My parents had gone to attend a family emergency, leaving me to navigate the quiet solitude of our suburban home. The familiar sounds of their departure echoed in my ears as I closed the front door, realizing the weight of isolation that now enveloped me. To ward off the encroaching silence, I decided to immerse myself in a book, hoping the fictional world would provide a temporary escape from the palpable aloneness. The soft glow of the reading lamp cast a warm halo around me, creating a small haven against the encroaching darkness outside. As I delved into the pages, the rustling of leaves against the window pane mingled with the distant hoots of an owl. I reassured myself that these were ordinary sounds, the symphony of a tranquil night, but as the narrative in my book grew more intense, so did the shadows that danced across the walls. A sudden draft chilled the air, causing the flames in the fireplace to flicker erratically. I attributed it to the changing weather, dismissing the uneasy feeling settling in the pit of my stomach. However, the whispers that accompanied the draft were harder to ignore. Faint murmurs, like ghostly secrets carried by the wind, reached my ears. Brushing off the unease, I decided to retreat to my bedroom, hoping that the comfort of familiar surroundings would quell my growing anxiety. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by the soft glow of the moon filtering through the curtains. Shadows seemed to linger in the corners, creating an illusion of movement in the stillness. Upon reaching my room, I was startled to find the door ajar. I distinctly remembered closing it before settling down to read. A wave of unease washed over me, but I dismissed it as forgetfulness. As I entered, I noticed the room was unusually cold, despite the warmth retained by the rest of the house. The subtle hum of the air conditioning unit provided a haunting backdrop to an otherwise silent room. I convinced myself that it was just an overactive imagination, amplified by the solitude. However, as I approached the window to shut out the nocturnal chill, I saw a figure reflected in the glass, an ethereal silhouette that seemed to linger for a moment before dissipating into the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen, eyes fixed on the window. Rationality screamed that it was a trick of the light or a product of my anxious mind. Nevertheless, the lingering feeling of being watched compelled me to draw the curtains tightly shut, cocooning myself in a false sense of security. In an attempt to dispel the mounting tension, I turned on some music and drowned out the unnerving stillness. Yet, the melody seemed to warp into dissonant notes, and the lyrics carried a haunting undertone. I muted the sound, the abrupt silence plunging me back into the quiet abyss. As the night wore on, I decided to take refuge in sleep, hoping that the morning light would dissipate the shadows that clung to the edges of my consciousness. I nestled under the covers, closing my eyes in an attempt to escape the disquieting reality. In the witching hours, I was jolted awake by a soft whisper, a voice that seemed to beckon from the depths of the house. The words were unintelligible, a spectral murmur that echoed through the empty corridors. Fear gripped me as I strained to discern the source, realizing that the voice seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Compelled by an unseen force, I ventured into the hall, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The whispers grew louder, guiding me towards the staircase. Each step felt like a descent into an otherworldly realm, the shadows conspiring to reveal secrets hidden within the walls. At the bottom of the staircase, the whispers coalesced into a chilling narrative, a tale of a previous occupant, a soul lost in the limbo between life and death. The voice spoke of unresolved anguish, a tragedy that bound the spirit to the house. A cold draft swept through the hallway, extinguishing the flickering candle I had unknowingly carried with me. In the darkness, the apparition materialized, a figure cloaked in a spectral glow. Hollow eyes met mine, conveying a sorrow that transcended the barrier between the living and the dead. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend the unearthly encounter unfolding before me. The spirit beckoned, imploring me to help unravel the mysteries that bound it to the mortal realm. The walls seemed to pulse with a spectral energy as I followed the ghostly figure through the labyrinth of its tragic history. Images of a bygone era played out like haunting specters, revealing a narrative of betrayal and despair. As the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, the apparition faded, leaving behind a sense of peace that replaced the lingering fear. The once haunted house stood silent, as if exhaling the weight of its troubled past. When my parents returned, they found me in a state of disarray, struggling to articulate the inexplicable events of the night. The house, now bathed in daylight, appeared ordinary, devoid of the supernatural aura that had gripped it during the night. I hesitated to share the spectral encounter, fearing disbelief or concerns about my well-being. In the days that followed, the memory of that harrowing night lingered like a ghostly echo. The house, though outwardly unchanged, bore the invisible imprints of a supernatural encounter, and in the quiet moments, I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits of the past were still watching, their whispers echoing through the walls of our once harmless home. Story 4. The oppressive darkness clung to the corners of the room as the door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of our family home. My parents were attending a weekend event, leaving me to revel in the thrill of being home alone. Little did I know, that thrill would soon unravel into a night of terror. I decided to make the most of my newfound freedom, ordering takeout and queuing up a marathon of horror movies. The flickering glow from the TV cast eerie shadows on the walls, but I chuckled at my own nerves, dismissing the ominous atmosphere as a mere byproduct of the genre. As the night progressed, a storm brewed outside, thunder resonating through the house like a malevolent drumroll. The rhythmic pitter-patter of rain on the windows seemed to synchronize with my racing heartbeat. Unfazed, I nestled into the couch, shrouded in a blanket of faux bravery. The movie marathon concluded, and the clock struck midnight, signaling the witching hour. I decided to retreat to my bedroom, leaving the TV as a makeshift nightlight against the encroaching darkness. The rain intensified, creating a haunting symphony that underscored the ominous quiet of the house. Lying in bed, I tried to drown out the unsettling sounds. Creaks and groans echoed through the halls, but I reassured myself that it was merely the house settling. However, as I drifted toward the edge of slumber, an abrupt sound jolted me awake. A faint whisper, barely audible, yet unmistakably human. I strained to listen, the hair on the back of my neck prickling. The whisper, a spectral murmur, seemed to linger in the air. It beckoned from somewhere within the house, a voice both unfamiliar and unsettling. My instincts screamed at me to investigate, but reason held me back, urging me to attribute it to an overactive imagination. Attempting to dismiss the disquiet, I closed my eyes, determined to ignore the creeping unease. Just as I began to succumb to the drowsiness, a subtle shift in the atmosphere yanked me back to full alertness. The room felt charged, as if an invisible presence loomed in the shadows. Against my better judgment, I reached for my phone and turned on its flashlight. The pale beam cut through the darkness as I ventured into the hallway, each step accompanied by the sinister echoes of the creaking floorboards. The whispers persisted, guiding me toward the source like a spectral trail. The voice seemed to emanate from the basement, a place I rarely visited. The idea of descending into the subterranean unknown sent shivers down my spine, but a curious compulsion overcame my trepidation. As I reached the basement door, the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like an ethereal fog. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into inky blackness. The air grew colder with each step, and my flashlight struggled to pierce the profound darkness below. A damp, musty smell enveloped me as I reached the bottom, the basement unfolding into a cavernous expanse. The whispers coalesced into a spectral voice, a woman's lament. She spoke of loss, betrayal, and a tragic fate that bound her spirit to this forgotten realm. I stood frozen, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a spectral fog. As the narrative unfolded, the basement transformed into a spectral theater, projecting scenes of despair and heartbreak onto the damp walls. The voice pleaded for release, a plea that echoed through the desolate space. Unnerved, I stumbled upon an old wooden trunk tucked away in the corner. The whispers intensified as I cautiously opened it, revealing a trove of forgotten relics, a faded photograph, a lock of hair, and a tattered letter that chronicled a tale of love and betrayal. As I held the artifacts, the basement seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The voice guided me through a series of revelations, unraveling the tragic tale of the woman who once inhabited this house. I felt like an unwitting participant in a spectral drama, caught between the realms of the living and the dead. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the basement windows, the spectral voice faded into a sorrowful echo. The basement, once fraught with a haunting presence, now exuded a tranquil stillness. I ascended the stairs, leaving behind the ghostly whispers that lingered in the depths. When my parents returned, they found me pale and disheveled, unable to articulate the unearthly encounter that had unfolded in their absence. The basement, now seemingly ordinary, held no traces of the spectral drama that had transpired. I grappled with the haunting memory, unsure whether it was a vivid nightmare or a supernatural odyssey. In the following nights, the house retained an air of quiet normalcy. The whispers faded into the recesses of memory, and life resumed its familiar rhythm. Yet, in moments of solitude, I couldn't shake the feeling that the spectral voice still lingered, a phantom echo of a night when the line between reality and the supernatural blurred within the confines of my seemingly ordinary home. Story 5. The house sat cloaked in darkness, a silent sentinel overlooking the quiet neighborhood. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me to revel in the freedom of being home alone. Excitement mingled with a hint of trepidation as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into the corners of every room. Determined to ward off the encroaching sense of isolation, I decided to indulge in a movie marathon. The flickering glow of the TV danced on the walls, casting playful shadows that twisted and contorted with each passing scene. The comforting hum of the air conditioner provided a backdrop to the on-screen dramas, creating a cocoon of familiarity. As the night wore on, I found myself immersed in the tales of suspense and horror. The fictional narratives cast a spell, momentarily transporting me to worlds where the eerie unknown was confined to the realm of imagination. However, as the credits rolled on the last movie, the fantasy dissolved, and the reality of the silent house set in. The clock struck midnight, and an unexpected power outage plunged the house into absolute darkness. The sudden void of sound and light was disorienting, and a chill ran down my spine. I fumbled for my phone, the dim glow providing a feeble source of comfort in the pitch-black void. Determined to restore some semblance of normalcy, I reached for a flashlight and navigated my way to the circuit breaker. The house, now silent and devoid of the usual ambient noises, felt like a different entity, one that watched and waited in the shadows. As I reached the breaker, a creaking sound echoed through the stillness. My heart raced as I turned, the beam of my flashlight revealing nothing but the empty hallway. Dismissing it as the natural settling of an old house, I hesitated for a moment before restoring the power. With the lights flickering back to life, I returned to the living room, hoping to shake off the unease that had settled over me. But my shadows seemed to linger, darker and more sinister than before. I shook my head, chiding myself for succumbing to irrational fear. To distract myself, I decided to take a warm shower. The steam filled the bathroom, cocooning me in a transient sense of security. However, as I stepped out, a fogged-up mirror revealed something unsettling, a message etched into the condensation, as if invisible fingers had traced the words, "You're not alone." Dread pooled in the pit of my stomach. The unease that had been lurking in the background now clawed its way to the forefront of my consciousness. I scanned the bathroom, half expecting an intruder to materialize. But the house remained silent, and the only sound was the steady drip of water from the faucet. Summoning my courage, I dismissed the eerie message as a product of the steam and my overactive imagination. I wrapped myself in a towel and headed to my bedroom, determined to escape the palpable tension that hung in the air. As I entered my room, I noticed something amiss. The window, which I distinctly remembered closing, stood wide open. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles I had lit earlier. Panic set in, and I scanned the room for any signs of intrusion. The wardrobe creaked as if in response to my heightened anxiety. I approached it cautiously, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. With a hesitant hand, I flung the doors open, half expecting a malevolent presence to leap out. But the wardrobe revealed only the ordinary contents of my clothing. As I turned to leave, a whisper echoed through the room, a soft, barely audible voice that seemed to speak directly into my mind. "Leave this house," it urged, a plea tinged with desperation. The voice was ethereal, as if carried by a ghostly wind. I hesitated, paralyzed by the eerie encounter. The room grew colder, and the shadow seemed to coalesce into a humanoid shape near the open window. I stared in disbelief as the apparition took form, a translucent figure, its features obscured by a veil of mist. Its outstretched hand pointed toward the door, a spectral plea for my departure. Fear gripped me, but curiosity tethered me to the room. The ghostly figure spoke again, recounting a tale of tragedy that had befallen a previous resident of the house. A sense of sorrow permeated the room as the ghost implored me to heed its warning and abandon the dwelling. As the first light of dawn painted the horizon, the ghostly figure dissipated, leaving behind an empty room bathed in the soft hues of morning. I stumbled out of the house, still in my towel, the harrowing encounter etched into my memory. My parents returned to find me sitting on the porch, a haunted look in my eyes as I struggled to articulate the unearthly events that had transpired. The house, once a haven of familiarity, now bore the invisible imprints of a supernatural encounter. The whispers, the etched message, and the ghostly figure lingered in the recesses of my mind, a haunting reminder that, in the silent hours of the night, the boundary between the living and the spectral could blur within the seemingly ordinary confines of home. Story 6. The night was draped in an inky blackness, the moon hidden behind thick clouds that seemed to devour the feeble light of the stars. I found myself alone in our old farmhouse, my parents away for a weekend trip, leaving me to navigate the solitude of the countryside. The wind whispered through the rustling trees, setting an eerie soundtrack to the unfolding night. Wanting to dispel the encroaching sense of isolation, I decided to immerse myself in a book. The pages flickered in the dim glow of a solitary lamp, casting long shadows on the walls that danced with the swaying branches outside. The creaks and groans of the old house became background noise as I lost myself in the world of words. As the night deepened, a distant rumble announced an approaching storm. The branches outside thrashed against the windows, and rain began to patter on the roof. The symphony of nature's unrest heightened the isolation, and an uneasy feeling crept over me. I shook it off, attributing the discomfort to the combination of an old house and an impending storm. With a sudden flicker, the lamp extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. A chill raced down my spine, and I fumbled for my phone, its pale glow revealing the outlines of familiar objects. The storm outside intensified, its howling wind masking the sounds of the house settling. As I made my way to the kitchen for a flashlight, a soft thud echoed from somewhere within the house. I froze, my senses on high alert. The old wooden floors groaned beneath my cautious steps, and I strained to hear any sign of movement. Another thud, closer this time, echoed through the stillness. My heartbeat quickened as I traced the sound to the basement door. It stood ajar, a sliver of darkness inviting me into the unknown. The rational part of my mind urged me to dismiss it as a draft or the house's settling, but an inexplicable curiosity gripped me. With flashlight in hand, I descended the creaking staircase, each step amplifying the pounding in my chest. The basement, usually a place of forgotten storage, now felt like the epicenter of an unseen tension. The flashlight's beam flickered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. In the dim light, I noticed an old, dusty mirror leaning against the far wall. Its surface bore the marks of time, warped and tarnished. As I shone the light upon it, the reflection revealed a silhouette standing behind me, a silhouette that shouldn't have been there. I whirled around, the basement empty, except for the ghostly apparition in the mirror. A shiver ran down my spine as the mirror seemed to capture a moment from the past, a scene of a family gathered in the very basement, their faces distorted by a mixture of joy and sorrow. The basement seemed to pulse with the residual energy of forgotten laughter and tears. The flashlight flickered again, casting the room into momentary darkness. When the light returned, the reflection in the mirror had changed. No longer a family, but a lone figure, standing in the shadows. It was me, but not quite. The figure in the mirror wore an expression of anguish, eyes hollow and haunted. Fear clawed at my throat as I stumbled backward, the mirror now reflecting an empty basement once more. I rushed back upstairs, the basement door slamming shut behind me. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within me, its fury now a fitting backdrop to the inexplicable events unfolding in the seemingly ordinary farmhouse. Attempting to shake off the disquiet, I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me. The wind outside howled like a banshee, and the rain lashed against the windows. I convinced myself that the mirror's reflections were mere tricks, the product of a fatigued mind. In an effort to distract myself, I turned on the radio, hoping the tunes would drown out the unsettling echoes. As the music played, a staticky voice cut through, a voice that seemed to speak directly to me. "Leave this place," it urged, the words riding the airwaves like an otherworldly whisper. A chill settled in the room, and the voice continued, recounting a tale of tragedy that befell the farmhouse years ago. A family torn apart by secrets and loss, their restless spirits trapped within the time-worn walls. The radio crackled with spectral energy, and the voice pleaded for release. Terrified, I reached to turn off the radio, but the voice persisted, each word etching itself into my consciousness. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, as if the very air harbored the weight of the past. I felt like an unwitting conduit to a supernatural narrative, a witness to a story that transcended time. As the first light of dawn broke through the stormy night, the disembodied voice faded into silence. The room, now tranquil, bore no traces of the spectral encounter that had unfolded. Exhausted and shaken, I curled up on my bed, uncertain whether the night's events were a macabre dream or a chilling reality. When my parents returned, they found me pale and disheveled, unable to articulate the unearthly events that had transpired. The farmhouse, now basking in the morning light, appeared ordinary, a facade that concealed the lingering echoes of a spectral tale. In the years that followed, the events of that night remained etched in my memory, a haunting reminder that even the most unassuming places can harbor secrets of the supernatural. The farmhouse, with its old mirrors and creaking basement, stood as a testament to the thin veil between the living and the spectral, an encounter that blurred the line between the familiar and the unknown within the walls of my seemingly ordinary home. Story 7. The quiet suburban street lay shrouded in darkness, and I found myself home alone for the first time. My parents had gone on a rare weekend getaway, leaving me to relish the solitude of our cozy house. The sense of freedom and independence was invigorating, but little did I know that the tranquility would give way to a nightmarish experience. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to indulge in a horror movie marathon, reveling in the thrill of fear that only comes when you're alone in the house. The flickering glow of the TV cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the unsettling sound effects reverberated through the silent rooms. It was the perfect setup for a night of scares, or so I thought. As the last movie reached its climax, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The air grew thick with an unexplainable tension, and the flickering light of the TV seemed to dance to an unseen rhythm. I dismissed the unease as a side effect of the horror genre, but an involuntary shiver ran down my spine. Deciding to break the eerie atmosphere, I headed to the kitchen for a snack. The refrigerator hummed softly as I scanned its contents. Just as I closed the door, I caught a glimpse of something, a fleeting shadow in the periphery of my vision. I turned, but the kitchen remained empty. Brushing it off as a trick of my imagination, I made my way back to the living room. The unease lingered, but I attributed it to the residual fear from the horror movies. I settled into the couch, attempting to distract myself with a book, but the words on the page blurred as my mind fixated on the inexplicable sense of being watched. As the clock ticked away, I decided to retire to my bedroom, hoping the familiarity of my own space would dispel the mounting anxiety. The house creaked as if exhaling with each step I took. In my room, I closed the door, cocooning myself in the illusion of safety. The rhythmic ticking of the clock on my bedside table echoed in the silent room. I lay there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, when an abrupt chill swept through the air. The room seemed to contract, as if an unseen force had entered. A creaking sound, like footsteps, echoed from the hallway. My pulse quickened as I strained to listen. The footsteps approached my door, and a spectral whisper brushed against my ear. "Alone, but not truly alone," it murmured, the words lingering like a phantom breeze. My breath caught in my throat as the disembodied voice faded, leaving me in stunned silence. Summoning courage, I swung the door open, expecting to find an intruder. But the hallway stretched before me, empty and dimly lit. The air hung heavy with an indescribable energy, and a subtle draft sent a shiver down my spine. As I hesitated in the doorway, the lights flickered, casting disjointed shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls. A guttural sound reverberated through the house, a sound that felt more primal than human. The source remained elusive, hiding in the shadows that clung to the corners. Fear gripped me, but curiosity propelled me forward. I followed the disconcerting sounds through the twisting corridors of the house. The air became charged with an otherworldly presence, and the walls seemed to pulsate with a spectral energy. The whispers returned, a chorus of voices murmuring incoherent phrases that sent chills down my spine. As I reached the staircase, the air turned icy, and a figure materialized on the landing. It stood shrouded in darkness, a silhouette that seemed to defy the natural order. The voice returned, now emanating from the shadowy figure, a lamentation of a past long gone, a tale of tragedy etched into the very essence of the house. Mesmerized and terrified, I listened as the figure unfolded its spectral narrative. It spoke of a family that once called this house home, a family torn apart by unforeseen circumstances. The spectral voices painted vivid scenes of love and loss, each word etching a sorrowful memory into the very walls that bore witness. With each revelation, the figure gained substance, its features becoming discernible in the dim light. Hollow eyes locked onto mine, and a chilling realization gripped me. This was the ghost of a former resident, a restless spirit trapped between worlds. The figure beckoned me to a forgotten room at the end of the hallway. The door creaked open, revealing a space frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture and faded photographs adorned the room, each artifact a testament to a life abruptly interrupted. As I stepped into the room, the atmosphere intensified. The ghostly figure guided me through the remnants of its past, and the spectral voices reached a crescendo. I witnessed moments of joy and anguish, each imprint left behind like a spectral residue. In the corner, an old music box lay dormant. The figure gestured toward it, and with a hesitating hand, I wound the mechanism. The haunting melody filled the room, resonating with the pain and longing of the ghostly presence. As the last notes faded, the atmosphere shifted. The figure, now bathed in a soft, ethereal light, extended a spectral hand. A sense of calm washed over me as I understood its silent plea. With a nod, I accepted the unspoken task to set the spirit free from the shackles of its haunting past. As the first light of dawn painted the horizon, the ghostly figure dissipated, leaving behind a room filled with a serene stillness. The whispers ceased, and the air, once heavy with spectral energy, felt lighter. When my parents returned, they found me in a state of contemplation. It took time to gather the courage to recount the surreal encounter that had unfolded in their absence. The house, now seemingly ordinary, bore no traces of the spectral drama that had transpired. In the years that followed, the memory of that haunting night lingered, a testament to the thin veil that separates the living from the ethereal. The house, once a source of comfort, had become a backdrop for a paranormal encounter that blurred the boundaries between reality and the supernatural. And in the quiet moments, I couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers of the past still echoed within the walls of our once harmless home. Story 8. The night was cast in an oppressive silence as I found myself home alone for the weekend. My parents had gone on a last-minute trip, leaving me to navigate the quietude of our large, secluded house. It was a sprawling mansion, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to swallow the feeble glow of the outside world. Excitement and trepidation mingled as the door closed behind them, leaving me to embrace the freedom and isolation. Determined to make the most of this solitary adventure, I decided to immerse myself in a creative pursuit. As an artist, I relished the opportunity to let my imagination run wild. The large studio on the top floor became my sanctuary, filled with canvases, brushes, and the haunting stillness of the night. The hours melted away as I lost myself in the strokes of paint, each movement a cathartic release. The clock on the studio wall struck midnight, and I decided to take a break, my senses heightened by the sudden silence that permeated the house. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves outside, carried by the gentle night breeze. With the desire to shake off the eeriness, I made my way to the kitchen for a snack. The hallway stretched like a desolate tunnel, the dim glow of the moon casting elongated shadows on the Persian carpets that lined the floor. As I reached for a bag of chips, a chill grazed my neck, and a whisper of wind seemed to carry a faint, distant voice. I dismissed it as my imagination, attributing the unease to the vast emptiness of the house. Returning to the studio, I resumed my artistic pursuits, the rhythmic strokes of the brush becoming a symphony against the hushed backdrop of the night. As I delved deeper into my creative trance, a sudden draft caused the studio door to creak open. Startled, I turned to see the door ajar, revealing the pitch-black corridor beyond. I rose to investigate, the unease escalating with each step. The shadows seemed to writhe and contort, taking on unnatural shapes that flickered in the periphery of my vision. I reached the end of the corridor, where a grand staircase descended into the darkness below. A soft, haunting melody wafted through the air, the source elusive. The dim light from the studio barely reached the abyss below, leaving the lower floors cloaked in an impenetrable gloom. Against my better judgment, I descended the staircase, the melody growing more pronounced. It was a melancholic tune, a symphony of sorrow that seemed to echo through the very walls of the house. The air became heavy, and a scent of antiquity lingered, a fragrance of bygone eras. As I reached the ground floor, the melody led me to the parlor, a room adorned with antique furniture and faded tapestries. A grand piano sat in the corner, its keys untouched by human hands for years. Yet, the haunting melody continued to emanate, each note a lamentation that hung in the air. Compelled by an unseen force, I approached the piano. The keys trembled as if played by spectral fingers. I hesitated, but the eerie compulsion guided my hands to the keys. The music became an ethereal dance, as if the ghosts of the past had chosen me as their conduit. The parlor transformed into a spectral ballroom. Flickering candles materialized, casting a dim glow on the shadowy figures that swayed in an otherworldly waltz. Their faces were obscured, and their movements ethereal. I found myself a reluctant participant in a spectral masquerade, the notes of the piano guiding the dance. The atmosphere grew charged with a spectral energy. The figures seemed to beckon toward the grand mirror that adorned the wall. As I approached, my reflection began to distort, a mirage of faces, each one telling a story of the house's haunting history. The mirror became a portal to a time long past, and the figures in the reflection seemed to implore me to unravel the mysteries that bound them to the house. A cold wind swept through the parlor, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into darkness. The spectral figures disappeared, leaving me alone in the silent abyss. The echoes of the haunting melody faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. Fear clutched at my chest as I stumbled back to the studio, the once familiar house now an enigmatic labyrinth of unseen forces. The studio door slammed shut behind me, sealing off the spectral visions that had unfolded below. In the solitude of the studio, I grappled with the inexplicable encounter. The spectral dance, the haunting melody, and the distorted reflection in the mirror lingered in the recesses of my mind. Was it a macabre illusion, or a communion with the spirits that dwelled within the mansion's ancient walls? As dawn painted the sky with hues of pink and gold, I emerged from the studio, the weight of the night still heavy on my shoulders. The once quiet house stood serene, as if concealing the secrets of the night within its very foundation. When my parents returned, I struggled to articulate the spectral odyssey that had transpired. The mansion, with its opulent façade and hidden mysteries, stood as a testament to the thin veil between the living and the spectral. The night had woven a tapestry of supernatural encounters, leaving me with an indelible connection to the haunted history of our once solitary home. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced with the memories of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits of the past still lingered. Their whispers carried by the wind through the empty corridors of our ancestral mansion.